It's a very black and white conversation when I prefer to work in shades of grey, as I was
Feel
saying
free to make it
beforehand.
colorful. I mean, go ahead if you want to make it colorful.
Colour is, I mean, I meant to mention about the medical. Now, you say the medical system in the States is fine. You have a lower life expectancy than virtually every other major Western nation. I don't know the actual numbers, but I think the life expectancy in America is of the order of about 74 or 78, I think it is, and in most of the rest of the world it's 84. And you pay about 3 times as much per capita for the health system. And the reason health works very badly as a private good is because when you find you're dying of a fatal disease, you don't have any bargaining power. If you find you've got a disease you need the best doctor for, you'll pay the best doctor's price no matter what.
I think a lot of people would say on that side, how do you like Robert Kennedy? How do you feel about RFK?
I think he's a fool.
You think he's a fraud?
I think he's
What's up, everybody? Jackson here, and this Steve Keen and Patrick Bet David debate over capitalism, China's economic model, and American healthcare is packed with specific numbers worth checking directly. Keen makes a striking claim that the US pays roughly 3 times what other developed nations pay for healthcare while getting a lower life expectancy in return. Bet David's response is essentially to change the subject to GDP and poverty. Reduction figures, I want to check both sides of this carefully because there's real data here worth verifying rather than accepting from either debater. Stick with me. Get that like in. Get subscribed because we check the numbers before repeating them. Now, let's get into it.
Has studied both Marx and the Russian and the Chinese and the Russian experience and Kornai's work as well, and they realised they had to find some way of guaranteeing innovation would occur at the level of consumer products, and they've done that. They have centrally planned laying out the infrastructure. So the roads, the rail systems you see are all state-owned and state-managed, but in things like car manufacturing, I think it's about 120 Chinese car companies at the moment. That won't last. But it means you've got 120 different companies competing for the share of the same market. They're innovating like crazy, and therefore this Chinese system has got the best of both worlds in the sense they've got central planning for infrastructure and long-term development, and they're doing that quite brilliantly. And at the same time, they've got enormous innovation taking place in the private sector, which is all driven by profitability and capitalist motivations and so on. So in terms of the country which succeeded from a Marxian foundation, it's definitely China.
How should we judge success between capitalism and communism?
Well, if you're going to use the America versus China result, China's rate of economic growth and China's lifting of people out of poverty transcends anything America's achieved over its time. So American industry has lost complexity, lost sophistication. China's increased its complexity, increased its sophistication, and since the Deng Xiaoping reforms, which are absolutely critical, occurred, you've had something like over 500 million people raised from out of absolute poverty. So
which they embrace capitalism, right? They embrace an element of capitalism.
An element of capitalism.
Yeah, of course.
There's a tendency to be like a cardboard cutout attitude, capitalism versus communism, as if there's a standard version of both. Now, of course, there's dramatic variations in capitalist nations and in communist nations. And
I would put China as capitalist because their government is communism, but they have a free market element that allows you to compete. It's not by force. You can have an opinion, you have an ability to build a business, and they watch others succeed, and they decided to copy what was working, which is America. So did Russia in a sense. Wouldn't you agree on those two concepts?
No, I wouldn't.
So you would say that Russia and China are still 100% communist nations?
No, I'm not saying 100%. This is why I think you're trying to put things that black and white pictures when everything is shades of grey.
Why don't we do this? Can you define what communism means to you? What is the definition of communism to you?
Well, we don't have communism anywhere on the planet, okay? Because if you had to get a pure statement of the ideologies of both systems, capitalism basically says everybody out for themselves, get the best possible gain you can for yourself, and out of the self-interest and self-obsession, you'll get the best possible outcome.
That's your definition of capitalism? That it's only self-interest?
It's not the one that I heard.
It's mathematically impossible if it's only self-interest for you to succeed.
Yes, that's true.
It's impossible.
And that's an important point. Both systems are impossible in their extremes. And there's a tendency in Western thinking to go left versus right, one extreme versus another extreme. The socialist economies tend to be 50-50 or more provided by the state. Capitalist less than 50-50. But as time has gone on, there's more and more things that are needed for a sophisticated society that are what you can call public goods. So, for example, health. My health affects your health. If I come down with a communicative disease, you're going to catch it. So there's ways in which that's a public good rather than just a private good. Now, there's an enormous range of things that are like that now. Education, we all benefit from an educated workforce. We suffer from a dumb one. So I think it's a division between the extent to which goods are provided by the state system as just part of the fact that you're a citizen versus having to pay for them. And the socialist economies will have more of that. And I think that's actually, in effect, that's the trend we've been going through over time, because 150 years ago, you didn't worry about sewerage. You had shit running down, the streets of London into the Thames River. If you move to a more advanced and sophisticated society, we can't tolerate that. And that means you have the state providing those services. If you leave it to the private sector, those services will break down.
Those services would break down. I mean, a lot of people would say anything produced by the government, it's shittier customer service. They treat you horrible. They can make you wait as long as possible. And free market, if they do that, they get complaints, and those complaints hurt their business. But the state doesn't have competition. What would the state worry about if they don't treat you well? They have a different energy when they talk to certain people. I was in the U.S. Army. I was in the military, and I've dealt with the state for a long time. I've never seen any customer service on how they treat people be better that's ran by the state than ran on the free market side.
When I was in China the first time, which was 81, 82, I ran a seminar between Australian journalists and Chinese journalists, which was observed by a large number of students of journalism in China. This is the beginning of China having not a free press, but a press system. And the one thing the students were most fascinated by, that I unfortunately did not give them information on for various reasons, was the ombudsman system that Australia had, which had copied from Sweden. And the ombudsman system put controls and monitoring sets on public servants. Now, it seems that China has implemented that. If you become a bureaucrat in China, you have a set of guidelines that you're required to reach, and if you don't reach them, you either get sacked or you don't get promoted, and you get ossified. And that seems to be a large part of why the public services in China seem extremely well provided, and certainly better than what you get in America. The best example of free market failing America is your health system. Would you agree with that?
No, I don't think so. I think we have a great health system. I think.
Do you now? It costs three times as much as the rest of the world.
Do you think?
You pay about 3 times as much per head for health as most Western nations do.
Our capita per GDP is also higher. If Australia was a state with us, you would be number 40. If UK was a state, it would be behind Mississippi at 51. So it's also capitalism's brought more people out of poverty in U.S. than any other country in the world. I'm surprised you're fighting this. But look,
I'm sorry, but I'm finding this a very black and white conversation when I prefer to work in shades of grey.
Feel free to make it colorful. I mean, go ahead if you want to make it colorful.
Colour is, I mentioned about the medical. Now, you say the medical system in the States is fine. You have a lower life expectancy than virtually every other major Western nation. I don't know the actual numbers, but I think the life expectancy in America is of the order of about 74 or 78, I think it is, and the most of the rest of the world, it's 84. And you pay about 3 times as much per capita for the health system. And the reason health works very badly as a private good is because when you find you're dying of a fatal disease, you don't have any bargaining power. If you find you've got a disease you need the best doctor for, you'll pay the best doctor's price no matter what.
I think a lot of people would say on that side, how do you like Robert Kennedy? How do you?
Let's start with the healthcare spending and life expectancy figures because they're the most consequential claims in this whole exchange and they're directly checkable against OECD data. According to recent OECD health statistics, US per capita healthcare spending runs significantly higher than the average across other developed nations, generally cited in the range of 2 to 3 times higher, depending on the specific year and comparison set used. US life expectancy has also consistently trailed the OECD average by roughly 2 to 3 years in recent data. Both of these are well established, frequently cited statistics from a credible international data source, and they're worth pulling the current figures directly from the OECD if you want the most precise, up-to-date comparison, since both numbers shift somewhat year to year. On Keen's point about why healthcare functions poorly as a purely private good, that people facing a life-threatening diagnosis have essentially no real bargaining power in a market transaction. That's a genuine argument from health economics about market failure in inelastic demand situations. Not just a rhetorical point, it's a well-established concept in economic literature on healthcare markets specifically. Worth reading directly from health economics research if you want the fuller academic treatment of why healthcare often doesn't behave like a typical competitive market. On Bet David's response, that higher per capita GDP justifies the higher healthcare spending, or that comparing US states to other countries shows favorable economic performance. These are real, if somewhat different, economic claims. Comparing US per capita GDP to other nations is a legitimate economic comparison, but it doesn't directly address the health outcome question Keen raised. Having a higher GDP doesn't by itself explain why healthcare spending isn't translating into longer lifespans relative to lower spending countries. That's a meaningful gap in the response worth naming directly, since it doesn't actually engage with the specific efficiency question being asked. On China's poverty reduction figures, the claim that roughly 800 million people have been lifted out of extreme poverty in China since the economic reforms beginning in the late 1970s is a well-documented figure from World Bank data and is widely cited across the political spectrum by economists who otherwise disagree sharply about China's political system. That's a real, checkable economic achievement, and it's worth separating cleanly from any assessment of China's human rights, record, or political governance, which is a completely separate line of evaluation. Both things can be true. Significant, historically unprecedented poverty reduction, and serious, well-documented human rights concerns. Conflating those two questions or using one to dismiss the other doesn't serve an honest conversation about either. On the China capitalist or communist definitional debate, Keen's point that pure versions of either system don't actually exist anywhere, and that most modern economies exist somewhere on a spectrum of public versus private provision of goods, is a fairly standard and well-supported position in comparative economics. Reducing complex hybrid economic systems to a single label tends to obscure more than it reveals, regardless of which system or which label is being applied. Here's what I'd leave you with. When a debate features one specific checkable claim, like a per capita spending or life expectancy figure, and the response pivots to a different metric entirely, like overall GDP, that's worth noticing as a real gap rather than an actual rebuttal. The original question doesn't get answered just because a different, also true number gets introduced instead. So tell me, do you think GDP is a meaningful counter-argument to specific health outcome data, or does that comparison miss the actual question being asked? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more of these breakdowns that check every number against its source, get subscribed, because that's exactly what this channel is here for.